Imagine getting a $2 scratch-off ticket for your graduation, while your brother gets a brand new house. That was my reality. Hey, I'm Emily, and for most of my life, I was the one they forgot. Until a lottery ticket they barely remembered changed everything. I didn't just win $237 million. I won the chance to build a life they never thought I could. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. The morning started with a sparkle, the kind only a snowy Christmas could bring. Every house on our street in Springfield seemed wrapped in gold and green, strings of lights blinking in soft rhythms across frosted windows. I pressed my nose to the cold glass of my bedroom and watched the world glow, feeling a flutter of hope inside me. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe, just maybe, they would see me. I pulled on my thick socks and crept down the hall, careful not to wake Luke. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the sharper scent of the pine tree we dragged home 2 weeks ago. In the living room, presents spilled out from under the tree like a colorful river. My heart skipped. Maybe there was something special for me this year, something picked with me in mind. I settled on the couch and pulled a throw blanket around my shoulders, listening to the creak of the stairs as my brother, Luke, stumbled down, yawning loudly for effect. He was 15 and carried himself like he owned every room he entered. Behind him came Mom and Dad, smiling wide, holding mugs of coffee, wearing matching flannel pajamas. "Morning, champ," Dad said, ruffling Luke's already messy hair. Luke grinned, rubbing his hands together. "Can I start?" "Go ahead, baby." Mom laughed, raising her phone to record. I watched as Luke dove into the presents, tearing paper with a force that made me wince. Each rip brought a new round of cheers. A brand new PlayStation, the one all his friends had been talking about, lay gleaming on the floor. Luke whooped, lifting it high like a trophy. Mom clapped, and Dad chuckled deep in his chest. They circled Luke, hugging him, admiring the console from every angle. The room buzzed with energy, except where I sat. I tucked my hands under the blanket, smiling small. It was okay. They would get to mine next. Mom finally glanced over. "Emily, sweetheart, there's one for you under the tree. Go on, look." My fingers trembled slightly as I dug through the pile. A flat, crinkled package waited at the very back, half hidden. I pulled it out. No ribbon, no tag, just my name written hastily in black marker. I peeled back the paper carefully. Inside was a gray t-shirt 2 sizes too big, with the faded logo of a plumbing company across the front. A clearance sticker still clung stubbornly to the collar. $3.99. Beneath the shirt was a scratch-off lottery ticket. My cheeks burned. I held up the shirt, searching their faces for some hint that this was a joke, some hidden punchline waiting to be revealed. But Mom just sipped her coffee and said, "You're practical, Em. Clothes are good for you," Dad added with a shrug. "And hey, you never know. You might win big." Luke had already plugged in his new PlayStation, the blue glow of the TV reflecting in his eyes as he set up his first game. His laughter filled the room like music I wasn't invited to dance to. I forced a smile. "Thanks," I whispered, though it felt more like an apology than gratitude. I folded the shirt neatly, pressing it flat against my lap, my fingers tracing the rough texture of the cheap fabric. The lottery ticket slid into the folds, almost an afterthought. I looked at it. Bright colors, promises of riches. But my hands stayed still. I didn't scratch it. I didn't even want to. Somehow, even at 12 years old, I understood it wasn't really a gift. It was a placeholder. A symbol of how little thought they had left for me after pouring everything into Luke. Mom stood, stretching. "All right, Luke, let's take some pictures of you with your new console. Grandma's gonna want to see this." The 3 of them crowded together by the tree, their faces bright and shining. I sat quietly on the couch, clutching the gray shirt like it might anchor me to something real. My chest felt tight. Not in the way it did when I ran too fast, but in that hollow, aching way that makes you want to crawl inside yourself and disappear. They never noticed when I slipped away upstairs. They never even asked. In my room, the air was colder, quieter. I opened the top drawer of my desk and placed the lottery ticket inside, tucking it under a few old birthday cards and scraps of paper. The drawer creaked softly as I pushed it closed, a small sound in a house full of louder joys that had no room left for me. That was the first thing I ever buried alive. Not out of anger, but out of understanding. Some seeds don't grow no matter how much you water them. And somewhere deep down, a tiny part of me began to wither, quietly and alone. In some families, every child's victory is a shared celebration. In mine, only one name ever made it onto the banners. It didn't start with anger, not at first. When Luke turned 16, I remember thinking how happy I was for him. We drove out to Lake Logan early that morning, the air still crisp with the tail end of spring. Mom had packed enough food to feed an army. Dad hauled coolers and grills. Luke strutted around wearing a plastic birthday king crown his friends made him, while pickup trucks pulled into the parking lot one after another. And there it was, parked beside the pavilion, gleaming under the sunlight. A brand new silver pickup truck with a giant red bow stretched across the hood. Luke's mouth dropped open. He sprinted toward it, whooping loud enough to scare off a flock of geese by the water. Everyone clapped and laughed. Even strangers at the park smiled and nodded like they were part of our family for the day. I helped Mom set up folding chairs and stack paper plates. No one asked if I wanted a turn posing with the truck. I didn't expect them to. Instead, I watched as Luke revved the engine and Dad recorded it all on his phone, capturing the way Luke beamed like he'd just been handed the world. I told myself my turn would come. 2 years later, on my own 16th birthday, I came home from school to find a frozen pepperoni pizza waiting on the counter. Mom was working late. Dad was glued to the TV, shouting at a football game. I microwaved 2 slices, set the table for 3, and waited. After an hour, I gave up and texted my 2 closest friends. They swung by with a half-deflated balloon and a gas station cupcake. We sat under the flickering yellow light in the kitchen, laughing too loudly, pretending it was enough. There was no red bow, no parade at the lake, just the buzz of the microwave and the faint smell of something burning. That was the first time I realized milestones in my life weren't events. They were speed bumps, barely noticed, quickly passed. Senior year, the feeling only deepened. Luke had already made it to college by then, star quarterback of his high school, golden boy of the family. Mom and Dad practically wallpapered the living room with his acceptance letters, scholarship offers, fraternity party pictures. They even got custom mugs printed with his university logo, sipping proudly from them every morning. Meanwhile, I was piecing together a future with part-time jobs at the local diner and the town library, cobbling together scholarship essays between closing shifts. Tuition didn't grow on trees, Mom said once, shrugging when I asked if they could help a little. Luke needed the boost. "You're tough, Em. You'll figure it out." And I did, but not in any way that earned a banner on the porch. When homecoming rolled around that fall, the entire town turned out for the parade. Luke returned, riding high atop the Grand Marshal float in his college jersey, waving like royalty. I stood on the sidewalk with Tasha, my hands buried deep in my jacket pockets against the cold, watching the streamers flutter past. People cheered and tossed candy into the crowd. Luke caught my eye for half a second, grinned, and threw a piece of bubble gum my way. It landed at my feet. I didn't pick it up. Tasha nudged me. "You okay?" I shrugged. "I'm used to it." She offered a small, knowing smile. Funny, isn't it? How we can be standing right in front of people and still feel invisible. Tasha became my anchor that year. We spent long nights on her porch swing, wrapped in old quilts, trading stories about growing up as afterthoughts. Her dad worked 2 jobs, and her mom barely remembered her birthday most years. We laughed about it sometimes, because laughing was easier than letting it hollow you out. Graduation crept up faster than I expected. One sticky June morning, I zipped into my itchy blue gown and adjusted the stiff square cap over my curls. In the parking lot outside the school gym, families gathered with cameras, bouquets, and helium balloons that bobbed against the low gray sky. I searched the crowd instinctively, hoping to see Dad's plaid jacket, Mom's red scarf, any sign that they were there. Nothing. No familiar faces. No banner with my name. Just the echo of Luke's latest group text from the family chat, sharing photos from another frat party 2 states away. The ceremony itself blurred by. My name echoed from the loudspeakers, but the applause that followed was scattered, polite from strangers who didn't know me. I shook the principal's hand, tucked the diploma under my arm, and stepped off the stage into a life I'd have to build from scraps. Outside, the parking lot was already half empty. No one waited with flowers. No one screamed my name. Just Tasha leaning against her battered Honda, holding out a paper cup of lukewarm coffee like it was a trophy. "You did it," she said simply, and in that moment it felt bigger than any red bow. We sat on the hood of her car for a long time, sipping coffee, watching the last clusters of families pose for photos under the gray sky. Some of us had to clap for ourselves, and maybe that was okay. As I stared out at the emptying parking lot, a thought crept into my mind, uninvited but persistent. I started to wonder if being invisible was safer than being seen and forgotten again. Sometimes life leaves you tiny lifelines disguised as jokes, forgotten until you need them most. By 2020, I had learned how to make a dollar stretch until it nearly snapped. My world had shrunk to a worn backpack, a cluttered studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a crumbling brick building in downtown Cincinnati, and a life balanced between exhaustion and bare survival. Mornings started early at a small print company. I ran copy machines that jammed every 15 minutes, answered phones that never stopped ringing, and smiled at customers who barely noticed my name tag. After a few hours, I'd rush across town to the bakery where Tasha worked the night shift. Together, we wiped down sticky counters, refilled pastry cases, and boxed up leftover muffins for the morning crew. I used to dream about weekends, but now I only counted them by how many shifts I could pick up. Dinner was usually instant ramen or day-old bread Tasha slipped me from the unsold rack. My sneakers had holes, my coat had a broken zipper, and my nights were filled with the low hum of city traffic bleeding through thin windows. But I was surviving. Somehow. My phone buzzed almost daily with new messages in the family group chat. Luke's smiling face at a Florida beach, Luke posing in front of a new boat, Luke showing off engagement rings bigger than my rent check. Sometimes Mom added a heart emoji. Sometimes Dad posted videos of Luke grilling steaks poolside, captioned with things like, "Our golden boy doing great things." I stopped checking after a while. Scrolling through those updates felt like pressing on a bruise just to see if it still hurt. One Friday night in the dead of January, I sat at my chipped kitchen table. A stack of unpaid electric and rent bills fanned out before me. The radiator rattled uselessly, and I wore 2 pairs of socks under my slippers just to keep my toes from going numb. Tasha had offered to lend me a few bucks for groceries earlier that day, but I couldn't bring myself to accept. I buried my face in my hands. My stomach growled, but I didn't have the energy to get up. Somewhere between despair and boredom, I started rummaging through the junk drawer next to the fridge, half looking for a working pen, half looking for an excuse not to cry. That's when I saw it. Buried under a dried-out ballpoint pen and some expired coupons was the scratch-off ticket. The same one from Christmas, years ago. The edges were bent, and the colors had faded a little, but it was still there, like a dare from my 12-year-old self. I almost laughed. A lottery ticket, worthless, a joke gift. Still, my fingers curled around it. Maybe it was the hopelessness. Maybe it was the numbness from too many letdowns, but I grabbed a quarter from the windowsill and started scratching without thinking. The silver coating flaked away easily under the coin. I read the first number, then the next. My hand froze. I blinked once, twice. My breath caught in my chest, matching numbers. Not just matching, jackpot numbers. $237 million. I dropped the coin, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the hum of the city outside. I stared at the ticket, afraid it might dissolve or combust under my gaze. No way. It had to be a mistake. With shaking fingers, I grabbed my phone and pulled up the state lottery website. My hands fumbled, slipping over the cracked screen. It took 3 tries to type in the verification code. I double-checked the numbers. Then again. It was real. The ticket was real. The win was real. I sat back, my chair creaking dangerously under the sudden shift of my weight. The room felt like it had tilted, like the entire world had cracked open and I was falling through it. But it wasn't joy that flooded me. It was fear. An overwhelming, suffocating fear that maybe, somehow, someone would take it away, that if I blinked, it would vanish, that if I dared hope for too much, the universe would snap the rug out from under me like it always had before. Without thinking, I folded the ticket carefully, reverently, and tucked it back into the drawer. Then I pushed the drawer closed so slowly it barely made a sound. Like if I moved too fast, the moment would shatter. I didn't scream. I didn't dance around the apartment like they did on the commercials. I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, feeling like I had just been handed a live grenade instead of a golden ticket. The heater groaned against the cold, but I hardly noticed. I stared at the cracked ceiling, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I wasn't afraid of being poor anymore. I wasn't afraid of being invisible. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of disappearing. I was afraid of being found. Freedom isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move anyway, even when your hands shake. When the check cleared, I didn't rush out and buy a mansion. I didn't hop a plane to some exotic island. I didn't even tell Tasha right away. I just sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at my chipped coffee mug, knowing the ground under my feet had shifted forever. The first thing I did was call Carolyn Whitman. She was a financial advisor I found after days of late-night research, the kind of woman whose reviews all said the same thing: steady, discreet, trustworthy. Sitting across from her in her downtown Cincinnati office felt like meeting someone who understood how fragile hope could be. She wore simple pearl earrings and had a habit of listening without interrupting, something I hadn't realized I needed until then. "We're going to build a wall around you first," she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk, "not to trap you in, but to give you room to breathe." Under her guidance, I set up a limited liability company, hired a tax attorney, and moved the winnings through channels that made my name nearly invisible. No flashing lights, no news articles, no distant relatives appearing out of nowhere. Next, I paid off every debt I had: student loans, credit cards, the overdue electric bill that still sat unpaid on my kitchen counter. One by one, I crossed the burdens off my list until there was nothing left but clean air and open possibility. Then came the house. I didn't want anything flashy, no giant fountains, no wrought iron gates. I found a modest 2-bedroom home in Edgewood, a quiet suburb about 20 minutes from the city. It had a small front porch, creaky wooden floors, and a backyard just big enough to plant a garden. When I first walked through it, the realtor apologized for the outdated kitchen and the slightly crooked fence. But to me, it was perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about breathing, about belonging. Moving day came on a rainy Saturday. I carried my chipped coffee mug, a duffel bag of clothes, and a handful of battered books into my new space. No fanfare, no big announcements, just me, my new keys, and a fresh start. For a few months, I kept my marketing assistant job at the print company. I woke up early, packed my lunch, took the same crowded bus downtown. I answered phones, filed paperwork, smiled politely at customers who didn't know that tucked inside my worn purse was a debit card linked to an account that could change my life 10 times over. There was a strange comfort in it. Blending in, living small. On weekends, I started a little garden in the backyard. At first, it was just lavender because it smelled like peace, then tomatoes, then a couple rows of strawberries that the squirrels raided more often than I did. I baked blueberry muffins and dropped them off anonymously on my neighbors' porches, wrapped in brown paper with twine. No one knew who I was, no one cared, and I liked it that way. By the time Memorial Day rolled around, the neighborhood buzzed with preparations for the annual block party. Red, white, and blue streamers hung from every porch. Children wobbled down sidewalks on scooters, dragging balloons behind them. Grill smoke filled the air with the smell of hamburgers and charred corn. Tasha came over that afternoon carrying a store-bought pie in one hand and 2 lawn chairs in the other. "You're really settling in," she said, plopping down under the shade of the maple tree in my yard. I smiled, pulling my knees to my chest. It's the first place that's ever felt mine. She didn't ask about the house or the car or why my old shoes had quietly been replaced with a sturdy new pair. She just handed me a slice of pie and said, "Here's to invisible victories." We sat there listening to the sounds of kids laughing and neighbors swapping stories, and for once, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I was part of it. Not because of money, not because of luck, but because I had built something real with my own hands. The next week, I walked into the bakery where Tasha and I had spent so many nights mopping floors and boxing pastries, and I gave my notice. It wasn't dramatic. No grand speeches. Just a quiet thank you to the manager and a final wipe of the counter where I had leaned too many weary nights. As I left, I paused by the back door, breathing in the familiar smell of flour and coffee one last time. Survival mode had carried me far, but it was time to lay it down, like an old coat that no longer fit. Still, as I closed that chapter, I knew better than to think it would be the end of challenges. Peace isn't something you buy once and keep forever. It's something you protect, day after day, and some things, no matter how carefully you hide, have a way of finding you. I thought I'd buried the past under 1,000 miles of new beginnings. Turns out, they had a shovel too. Summer pressed heavy against the sidewalks that year, thick and wet and unrelenting. Even the lavender in my backyard drooped under the weight of the heat. I spent most afternoons on the porch with a book and a glass of iced tea, the world outside humming with the sound of cicadas and the distant laughter of children on bikes. Life had settled into a rhythm I loved, quiet, predictable, mine. Then came the texts. At first they were casual. "Hey, how have you been?" from Dad. "We were just talking about you," from Mom. Even Luke chimed in once, asking if I still lived somewhere near Columbus. I knew better than to believe they missed me. People don't suddenly get sentimental without a reason, especially people who had trained themselves for years to look right through you. Turns out, my shiny white Tesla, the one I parked discreetly under the old oak tree, had been spotted by an old neighbor visiting Edgewood for a wedding. Word traveled faster than wildfire through small towns, and soon everyone knew Emily Carter wasn't just scraping by anymore. The casual texts turned into calls I didn't answer. Then came the real knock. It was a Sunday afternoon. The air was thick enough to slice. I was kneeling in the garden, coaxing stubborn weeds from between rows of lavender, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I wiped my hands on my shorts and stood slowly. There they were, Luke and Mom stepping out of a black SUV, squinting in the sunlight like they'd just landed on another planet. Mom clutched a baking dish wrapped in a faded towel. Peach cobbler, if my nose was any judge. Luke wore designer sunglasses and a smile that looked a little too rehearsed. "Emmy!" Mom called, waving with one hand while balancing the cobbler with the other. "Look at you!" I forced a polite smile and walked to meet them at the gate. "This is such a cute place," Mom gushed, looking around the yard as if inspecting merchandise. "And the car! Oh my goodness, is that yours?" I nodded, keeping my hands tucked into my pockets. Luke clapped me on the back like we were best buddies. "You always were the smart one," he said. "Looks like things turned out pretty good for you, huh?" I wanted to say, "Funny how that works when no one's there to trip you anymore," but I bit my tongue. We sat awkwardly at the picnic table under the maple tree, Mom setting the cobbler down like it was a peace offering. She fanned herself with a napkin, pretending to admire the garden. "We're so proud of you, honey," she said after a minute, voice syrupy and thick. Really, it's just, well, Luke and Haley, they're expecting again. Luke's smile widened. Another little guy on the way. We're thinking we'll need more space, somewhere the boys can have a real backyard. Mom nodded eagerly. And with everything going on, the timing's just perfect. We thought, maybe, since you're doing so well now. She trailed off, giving me the kind of look people give when they're about to ask for something they already feel entitled to. Luke leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. We found this place. It's perfect. Needs a little work. A bigger garage, a new nursery, nothing crazy. Just, about $100,000 would cover it. He said it so casually, like he was ordering another round of drinks. I sat back, feeling the wood of the bench press into my spine. For a moment, I let the old reflex rise, the one that said, be helpful, be good. Maybe they'll love you for it this time. But I wasn't 12 years old anymore. I looked at the cobbler on the table, the way the syrupy peaches had bubbled over the crust, and I realized it was the first gift my mother had brought me in over a decade. And even now, it wasn't about me. It was bait. I smiled, soft but steady. I'm happy for you, really, but I can't help with that. Silence blanketed the table, thick and stifling. Mom blinked, like she hadn't heard me right. Sweetheart, it's family. We always help each other. Family, I repeated, rolling the word slowly over my tongue like a foreign language. Luke's smile faded. His mouth twisted into something sharper. After everything Mom and Dad did for you... I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans. I don't owe anyone for surviving. Mom's voice cracked slightly. We're just asking for a little help, and I'm politely saying no. For a long moment, no one moved. The cicadas buzzed louder, filling the space between us. Finally, Luke stood too, sunglasses back in place. Fine, whatever. Must be nice to forget where you came from. I shrugged. I didn't forget. I just stopped pretending it was something it wasn't. Mom gathered the cobbler, looking as if she wanted to say something else, something that might salvage the afternoon. But in the end, she didn't. They walked back to the SUV in silence. They left without slamming the door. But the silence they left behind felt heavier than any slam could. Some endings aren't battles. They're just closed doors you choose not to open again. By the time the first autumn leaves started to fall, I had made my decision. I turned off notifications from the family group chat. I stopped answering texts. I stopped feeling guilty about it too. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations, no angry voicemails, just a slow, steady silence settling over the space where they used to echo. A silence I learned to welcome like an old friend. Fall in Edgewood was something out of a painting. Maple leaves blazed in reds and golds. The mornings grew brisk, the smell of wood smoke curling from chimneys down the block. I spent my days quietly, walking the farmers' market stalls, browsing cozy little bookstores in Columbus, sipping cider at outdoor cafes tucked under canopies of amber trees. Most mornings I'd sit on my porch, wrapped in a thick sweater, hands curled around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the world turn. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was choosing what stayed in my life and what didn't. That November, I held my first real celebration in years. A small gathering with Tasha and a few neighbors I had grown close to. We spread a simple checkered cloth across the porch table, set out vanilla cupcakes and mason jars filled with apple cider. No grand speeches, no flashing cameras, just laughter curling into the chilly evening air. Tasha hugged me tight, whispering, "You made it, Em." And in my heart, I knew she was right. Not because of the money, not because of the house, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing permission to be happy. Quietly, almost shyly, I handed her the first printed copy of my children's book. The cover was simple, a small, stubborn flower blooming between cracks in the sidewalk. The title read, "The Little One Who Grew Anyway." Tasha's eyes misted over. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Some victories don't need fanfare, they just need someone to bear witness. A few weeks later, on a snowy afternoon just before Christmas, I stopped by a little bakery downtown to pick up a loaf of fresh sourdough. The place smelled like cinnamon and rising dough. The windows steamed up against the chill. As I waited in line, I heard a voice behind me. Familiar, unmistakable. Em? I turned slowly. There was Luke. He looked older somehow, the shine worn down around the edges. He held a toddler in one arm, a coffee in the other. His smile was small, almost cautious. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, shifting the child to his hip. "Yeah," I said simply, offering a polite nod. For a moment, we just stood there, two people tied together by blood but separated by years of silence. There was no anger in me anymore, no longing either, just a quiet understanding that we had chosen different roads. "Hope you're doing good," Luke added, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I am," I said, and I meant it. He smiled, nodded once, and turned back to his family. I turned back to the counter, heart steady. No bitterness, no ache. Later that afternoon, I stood on my porch as soft snow dusted the lavender plants I had stubbornly coaxed through the summer heat. Their stems bent under the weight of it, but they didn't break. Neither had I. Spring came early the next year. One morning, I woke to sunlight spilling over the windowsills, warming the wooden floors under my bare feet. The lavender was sprouting again, tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil, reaching without hesitation for the light. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and carried my mug outside, the air crisp and sweet. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need apologies. I just needed mornings like this. And I had them, finally. There, on my small porch, surrounded by sprouting lavender, I realized life had quietly handed me everything I had once wished someone else would give. Sometimes the families we are born into can't offer the love we need, but that doesn't mean we can't build homes full of it ourselves. Healing isn't loud. It's in the small mornings, the soft friendships, the steady belief that we deserve to grow. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear how you found your own kind of home, wherever and however you made it.